Watkwanawaradu sewa guego Kahstoserakwathe ni Ionkwahronkha'onhátie. We're so excited today because we are interviewing director Cynthia Lamar from the National Museum of the American Indian. I also have my co-host here, Taiawentón Chelsea Sunday from Akwesasne, and we'll talk about how this all came together. Cynthia, first, we want to go to you. And what land are you from, and what traditions are you from? And then we'll get into how you got where you are today.
Greetings. Hello, everyone. I am Cynthia Chavez Lamar. I am from San Felipe Pueblo. That's where I grew up. That's my father's side of the family. I'm also Hopi, Tewa, Navajo from Arizona, my mother's side of the family. She grew up in a community called Paulette, which is in Arizona on the first mesa on the Hopi reservation. And where I grew up, San Felipe Pueblo is just north of Albuquerque, New Mexico, between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. I call it home. You know, even though I'm here in Washington, D.C., have been here for the past 11 years, I continue to call San Felipe and New Mexico my home. It'll always be home for me.
And you grew up there, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonderful. And Taiawentón, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Sego Zarwebo Taiawentón. You get Chelsea Sunday. My uncle name is Taiawentón. It means she throws the dawn or the daylight. I'm from the community of Akwesasne, Ionkwahronkha'onhátie or Mohawk, and I live in a portion of our community that we call Gisnaina, which is the channel, and I'm a super proud Gisnailono. I love being from this part of my community, and I'm a co-founder of an organization that we call Ionkwahronkha'onhátie or Ionkwahronkha'onhátie. It means we're becoming fluent, and we do grassroots language revitalization work, primarily right now inside of my community, but the original intention of it was to stretch across all of our Mohawk communities with the intention of increasing our fluency collectively and gathering, creating a community of speakers type deal. And that's what I do. And I'm currently sitting in our office or our cabin where we do our language work on the river, and it's super beautiful out today.
Yeah. You got it. And I'm Kahstoserakwathe Paulette Moore. I'm from the other side of our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, from Six Nations of the Grand River, and also a Mohawk speaker and Mohawk person, and founded the Aunties Dandelion about 5 years ago, and we make media dedicated to our communities, focused on land, language, and relationships. So, Cynthia, we met you in Washington, D.C. this summer when Ionkwahronkha'onhátie was featured at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which was a beautiful experience. And we were just so taken by the fact that you came over to visit us, rolled up without, your whole team. You came in relationship. And I think that struck everybody that was there. And the fact that you've ended up at the Smithsonian in this really important position. And we want to ask you about your arc, from San Felipe to Washington, D.C., and what it means to be an Ongwehongwe or Indigenous woman that is in leadership positions. So you don't have to tackle all of that at once, but that's where we're going with this interview. So maybe first we could talk about NMAI and the lore of that museum and the importance of that museum to our communities.
Well, the museum has a really interesting history, and the heart of it is the collection that was established by an individual named George Gustav High, who was a wealthy investment banker in New York. And he had, of course, this great interest and fascination with Indigenous people and cultures, and had amassed this collection of over 700,000 items, over the course of his lifetime. And at a point in time, the the collection and the organization he had established, the Museum of the American Indian, became under threat of dissolution. And that's when the Smithsonian stepped in, and there was legislation created to establish a National Museum of the American Indian, which would then acquire this, large collection that High had developed over his lifetime. So, it's of course it's a collection that's has a colonial history, right? And I think that the people that came together and advocated for the establishment of the National Museum of the American Indian, of course, knew that history, but also knew how important everything that was in that collection was going to be to Indigenous people. And, made certain that in establishing the legislation and getting it passed, and then developing the National Museum of the American Indian, making sure that Indigenous people and their values were central to the creation of this museum. So, from the very beginning, its heart was really about Indigenous people. And I think that that's a really interesting history, right? To think about this collection that, well, yeah, basic colonial history, we strive to make it accessible to Indigenous people across the Western Hemisphere, and to make those connections with Indigenous people, communities, and establish partnerships and collaborations. And so I think it's actually a beautiful story, right? It's
Mhm.
evolved over the years and it's continuing to evolve, but at its core, it's still about the museum is really about its relationships with Indigenous people and how we can provide access to this collection.
And what would you say are the most outstanding parts of NMAI and the collection? What are your favorite either exhibits or artifacts that are there? And, part of the legacy that it's bringing back to our people, right?
It's hard for me to pinpoint or to speak about a specific exhibit or a specific item in the collection, because I always then think about the relationships and the stories that come out of all of those things, right? I mean, for example, right now we have an exhibition called Water's Edge, The Art of Truman Lowe. And Truman was our first contemporary Native arts curator at the museum in the early 2000s. And he is also a wonderful artist he was a Ho-Chunk artist.
Mm.
Due to one curator named Rebecca Troutman, we're able to have this great retrospective of Truman's work in the exhibition to honor him and to honor his relationship with the museum, especially in those early years. And it's a beautiful exhibition. If you're in DC in the next several months, please come to see it. But I always think about Truman, and I think about what he taught me when I was here in those early years as an
Mm.
assistant curator, and what he did for the museum when he was here as a curator. So for that reason, it makes it really special. But I can't say it's my favorite, because there's other exhibitions that have meaning for me as well, and
Yeah.
you might have a story with it. Same thing with collection items. Um, and given the size of the collection, it's also
Mhm.
hard, right?
Yeah.
Because something very simple might have a wonderful story to it that I don't know about um, because of where it comes from or who it's connected to. Or when you bring a community member and connect a community member to it, you know, what are the stories that come out of that experience? So
Yeah.
so I guess that's for me, that's what's really great about being at the museum is having the benefit of hearing those stories and having those kinds of experiences.
It was Taiawentón that really brought this together because of the impact that you had on all of us when you came to visit. Do you want to talk about that Taiawentón and then um, take it from there?
Yeah, sure. I'm like, now that you're talking, Cynthia, I'm like, all my memories of being in the collection are just popping up. I'm like, oh my God, I want to talk about all these different things and share all these
Yeah.
stories. Because exactly like you're saying, that was the experience that we started to have as we went in and we got to, see some of our items, and we got to pull out stuff that had language in it because we're a language revitalization group. So exactly like you're describing, that was how our experience went. When we were talking about getting this podcast together, and Kahstoserakwathe and myself, we had, different conversations over since going to DC. I was explaining how I was feeling leading up to our trip there, and then while we were there, and to like the moment that I met you actually, and you started talking, because we got invited. Probably, like, it must have been the year prior, like, they start doing the planning and things like that, and, I at first wasn't very drawn to it, like, I wasn't very excited about it, I'm just like, I don't know, I don't really have a thing for wanting to leave the community and share, knowledge or work about our communities with people that are not from the community, like, I
Mm.
kind of was like, "Ah, I got other things I need to be doing," but, we committed, and we went through with the planning. We got together a team of people, and, we're trying to figure out what we're gonna go there for and who are the best people to bring with us, given that we're, putting our language on display, but also cultural, and people are gonna ask us questions and things like that. And so we started pulling folks together. It was based on who was currently with our organization at the time, plus folks who've come through our organization and have exited and gone on and done other things, still in the language though. And even leading up to, jumping on the plane and getting into the hotel and being on the bus and all those
On the
things,
bus.
like, yeah, it was on the bus. I think Kahstoserakwathe had asked me, "So what are you excited about?" Or talk
She's
about what
like,
you're excited about. I'm
I
like,
don't know.
I'm just gonna be honest. I'm not very excited. And we started going through all the process, and we started having our days there on the ground. And um, I mean, I started watching. One of the things I really enjoyed was watching my teammates and different folks who were there with us, get up on stage or be in these spaces where they were able to talk about things that they were passionate about. And, there I kind of started getting the feelings. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Like, even if I don't feel this super, purposeful thing for my own self, like, at least I get to watch all these people, being passionate about the work that they do and sharing that with folks who are excited to hear from them. And then we had the morning where you stopped by, and at that time as well, like, I wasn't quite sure who you were. I don't really know much about the Smithsonian or even like this whole collection. So I was like, okay, I know this is cool and I know this is significant, but like, I just don't know. Like, I'm just not, there's nothing that's like jumping out in my heart that's like, yay, today's an amazing day. Until you walked in and started talking. And then I remember I had a moment where I'm just like, I don't even want to talk about anything else other than this woman, her work, and just this topic about women, Indigenous women specifically, who are in leadership positions on whatever level or in whatever space, and how it is that we're navigating whatever the causes that we're working for or we're working with. How are we navigating that? How are we staying passionate about those things? How are we transferring that passion and that energy to our staff and the folks who work with us? Like, how are we, I guess, artistically even showing the world like what we are doing has purpose and it's meaningful and it's working and it's powerful and all these different things. That's what I started thinking about because that's me too.
Mhm,
I'm that too.
mhm,
And to that point, I really wasn't connecting. I'm just like, this is great, but like, I feel like I don't want to say I feel like I'm on another level, but I wanted to have conversations and dialogue on another level. Because what I really, believe is that across our communities, across our nations, across these spaces, I feel like us women are doing really important work that's on another level than just like the surface level of like, I'm a director of this place and
Yep.
I do this. And I really feel as women like we're connecting to an energy or to something greater than ourselves, and you can see it. Like when you find different women who are very impassioned about what they're working on, you can see this like okay, that's one of those women. And so I seen it in you that day, and I immediately was like, Kahstoserakwathe, we need to talk. And I surprisingly enough had also been seeing it in Kahstoserakwathe. And I say surprising because, when we were planning on going out there, we were also talking about doing this documentary where we're documenting the work that my organization is doing because it's beautiful work, and the stories are really beautiful. And so in my mind, I kind of was just like, okay, she's going to be recording us. We're going to be doing this cool documentary, and like I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, but it's like kind of in the background because the foreground was like my team and the things we're doing and what we're wearing and all that stuff. But then I'm sitting here, behind the camera watching Kahstoserakwathe as a director. In that moment, I'm like, she's directing and she has a team. And I had even made a comment to I forget what his name was. He was the male there that was recording us as well.
Jim Ball.
So Jim, I remember asking him a question. I'm like, I don't remember the question was, so is this what I have to do or should I do this or whatever? He goes, don't ask me. You need to ask the boss. She's in charge. And I'm like, oh, of course. Why didn't I think of that? So these two, like watching you, Cynthia, and then watching Kahstoserakwathe over like the course of that week, orchestrate this behind the scenes, production, and then relating it to myself, I'm just like, we need to talk about this. Like, I just want to be in rooms with other women leaders, and I want to have those kinds of conversations because it's very clear that we're very passionate and we're very driven, and we have to have skills and we have to be able to translate these things so that other folks can get it and get behind it and get behind us as leaders and things like that. And then even the bigger cause, like I was mentioning, like how are we impacting a bigger cause beyond language or beyond, creating videos and documentaries and podcasts or beyond the Smithsonian, like so that's where this came from,
Really?
And
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to get to share that with you, but I
Yeah.
don't have a question. I just wanted to share the story,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Well, I'm completely surprised to hear that, and like the story for sure. And I think this is something, my husband is always talking to me about sometimes because he says sometimes he's like, you have to recognize sometimes the position you're in. He said sometimes you don't recognize the potential impact that you can have on people and you underplay that. And I guess my thing is I don't want to get in my head as a director of NMAI, right? I just want to be a regular person. But then I think sometimes by doing that, I maybe don't provide the kind of experience that people maybe want to have with the director of the National Museum of the American Indian, right?
Yeah.
But I'm very happy to hear that because that day, I was just, I was being genuine. You know what I mean? I was still the director of the National Museum of the American Indian, but I had the chance to talk with all of you. You're all, young people and out there on the National Mall talking with all kinds of different people. And I just felt like, you're taking a lot out of your time and you're sharing something that's important to you with all of these strangers. And I just want to have a genuine experience with you and let you sort of, I guess, see that sometimes I'm in a similar position, right? Talking with all of these people that are strangers to me, but but what we're doing is important because we're trying to share something about a Native experience, right? So I'm heartened to hear this story because it gives me that reminder that for these engagements that I have with people do make an impact, and sometimes an impact that I'll never know about, but it's nice when you hear them. So thank you.
And Cynthia, I have another story as well of when you spoke at the opening at the Pueblo Cultural Center in New Mexico, and you spoke about your dad, and you spoke that so at that opening, you were talking about your relationship to the Pueblos and also your dad and the experience, and you allowed yourself to be really emotional about that. And a friend of mine she was the other woman that was part of the team that was recording, Christina Bavetta, was just like, because she's of Washington, right? And she was just like, oh my God. And I was like, she's home and she's being authentic. And I think she was almost worried for being that
Mhm,
vulnerable.
mhm,
And the balance of that authenticity, and people want you to show up and be a director, whatever that means. How do you see that kind of balance? It feels like that's what you're talking about, of having that authenticity and vulnerability, and also just the chance to just laugh and be relaxed, and then being director. And there's so many layers of responsibility as an Indigenous person that go on. So how do you narrate that and then balance that?
I don't know that I have a certain way of doing it or a formula or anything. I think that what I try to do is, well, one, I really do feel like I have the benefit of having had a connection to the museum since 1994 because I was an intern here in
Oh,
94. Then I came back as an assistant curator from 2000 to 2005, and then went back to New Mexico and then came back here in 2014. So, like I have this long connection with the museum and all of those memories, right, that I established over those years with the museum and with people at the museum, that very much factors into who I am as a director and my experience as a director now. And I think that that's been really helpful and helping me make connections with people because, I didn't just come to this job 4 years ago, never having had, a past history with the museum.
right.
I think if I had, it'd be a different experience. So, like the things that I feel about this place, they're very real, and not to say that someone else isn't, but, I credit the museum with having taught me how to be a museum professional,
Mm,
right? Like, my career started here. So those feelings or those sentiments or the things that I say about the museum are very real. Like, they resonate with me, in my heart. And so I think for like a balance, like I don't have to think about it as much because it's just there. Although, there's times when I get really tired and really an introvert. And, when I'm out and about and I have to talk to a lot of people and everything, after a while, I do get tired. And it's just like I'm having to like pull those reserves. Like, okay, you just gotta do this for another 30 minutes. But I also always have to remember that, and this is something my parents taught me, is like you never know who you're gonna meet. And you always have to treat them in a good way, and so so I always keep that in my head too. It's like no matter how tired you are or whatever, you always treat people in a good way. And so there's those are those kinds of things that also help me and guide me. But in terms of vulnerability, I don't know if it's just my age to, get to a certain age as a woman and your emotions are a little kind of sometimes all over the place. And sometimes just things really get to me, and I feel it, and I can't hold it in, and I just, and it happens, and you start crying. And the first time that happened in this job, uh, after it happened, I was just like, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah.
I started having to think about it and think about it. But now I'm just to the point, like, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I feel, and I don't want to hold it in. I mean, I don't want to like have mucus running down my face or anything, but you know,
Yeah.
but
But that
that's just,
became, yeah, that
yeah.
became just so powerful. That is
Hmm.
the power,
Hmm.
and that is the power I think that we find in our communities. We talk a lot about matriarchs and what we bring to the table, and that our whole selves coming to the table rather than suppressing all of that. That is a redefining, that is a re-narrating, I would say, of what power is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, because I think, especially probably in like the mid 20th century, it was just like if you wanted to be a successful woman, probably
Yeah.
even past then, you had to be like a man, right?
Yes. Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and in
Yeah.
DC as well, it's
Hmm.
really that way. I lived there
Yeah.
for decades and was a man,
Hmm.
basically,
Hmm.
and had to go through so many just processes to undo that. And, never asking anybody questions, just watching the crews that I would be in the field with and doing all of that and just being like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, and that makes you implode and explode. Did you have a mentor that you worked with, and how did you end up over there at the museum? And so then, what were the influences within your own home and the teachings? You've taught us a little bit about that, but how did that get you from San Felipe over to Washington D.C.?
I grew up in a family of artists. My dad's a jeweler, my brother's a jeweler. My mom, she worked in clay when I was growing up, so I learned to work in clay, and I was part of the Santa Fe Indian Market as a kid, selling my little creations.
Oh, cool.
And when I went to college, I was a studio art major. I studied printmaking and photography, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. And
Where was that,
uh,
Cynthia?
at Colorado College in
Okay.
Colorado Springs,
Hmm.
yeah. And I think it was maybe my junior year I started to get a little worried. I was because, and part of that was just not having the confidence in my creativity, or thinking, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to make it as an artist. And so I also knew I had this interest in Native history, Native art, and I thought, well, maybe I can go to grad school. So um, went to grad school to UCLA to get my master's in American Indian Studies, and it was there that was probably one of the first places where I had a mentor who was in the museum field, and I worked with this woman. Her name was Zena Pearlstone, and she was a guest curator at the UCLA Fowler Museum, and she was doing this exhibition on Hopi art, and my was her research assistant. And that's really when I learned about curation and talked to her a little bit about it. And she said, well, if you really want to go that route at that time, right? This was early 90s. She said, you really should get your doctorate.
Mhm.
I think the recommendation now would be different, right? But back then it was just like, you should get your doctorate.
Mhm.
So from there, I went to the University of New Mexico and entered the Native American Art History program, their doctoral program. The first semester, I just became very disillusioned with the program. I was already a graduate student I was, a doctoral candidate, and they were asking me to take freshman level art history courses. And I was just like, I'm not going to do that.
Mhm.
And I didn't come here to do that. I don't want to do that. And so I had to take a semester off, and I was just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I looked around the University of New Mexico and found the American Studies department, which is interdisciplinary, where I could sort of essentially create my own degree or my own doctoral program, and decided to enter that program. And that's where I met my second mentor also. She was an anthropologist. Her name was Mary Lynn Salvador. And I took a class with her, and that was the first time I ever heard about someone working the lifetime of their career, like collaboratively with indigenous communities. She worked with the Guna, and that was just like kind of fascinating to me. I had that experience with this other curator at UCLA working with the Hopi, but that seemed more just sort of like a consultation. And this experience with this other mentor, Mary Lynn, it was just like that she's made her career. Like she's, has relationships with these people, and goes there, has, gone with them to see museum collections of their work. And, I would say that that's when sort of things began to sort of click about this idea of working with collections, working with communities. Uh, and and then that's when I decided to also intern at the NMAI, because that was the first year. That was the summer before they opened
Oh, cool.
the museum in New York. Yeah.
Wow.
So I definitely have had a lot of people help me along the way to sort of figure out what it is I want to do. I will say that one thing I haven't been good at is really asking for help. I think I'm better at it now, but when I was younger, I didn't do a lot of that. Uh, or, admit I didn't know when I need help.
Yeah.
Uh, so, uh, yeah, but definitely a lot of people have supported me over the years, particularly my parents. They'll be the first ones to tell me that they don't really know what it is I do, but they've been incredibly supportive over the years.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
As you were talking, I was thinking of a bunch of different things and wanted to ask you a bunch of different things. But all that's kind of coming to me right now is like I just kind of want to share our experience going up there and then going into the collections, because
Yeah.
I think that's what we were. If we were excited about anything, it was going there and seeing our items, and then in particular, everybody wanted to look at what language was kept. We first get into that atrium and we kind of circled up and we had some moments in there, and then we started going in, and like going into the different rooms where different things happen, and we seen different parts of the collection and things like that. We ended up finally in a room where they had all of our items laid out on the table, and even there was like another part in the back where they had like old newspaper articles and different things like that. And of course, we're just like, we're like, you can feel it. You can feel everything. And we're picking up the moccasins, we all got our little rubber gloves on and looking at the moccasins and seeing which community they're from. And because we had so many folks from different communities in our cohort, everybody kind of got to see something from their own community represented there. We were all moved by those cradle boards, like picking them up, and like you can feel it. You can feel like you can still feel the energy of like those children that must have, been swaddled and held in there, and like, as mothers were just like, crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was so moving. And then this story is super beautiful because we got to the baskets. Mohawk people are known for our baskets, and there was an old basket maker who's passed away now, and she was, world renowned, Mary Adams, and she had some of her baskets in there. And what's interesting about this story is, as we were planning to go to the Folklife Festival and we were getting our team together, we wanted to bring an elder with us, because our whole thing is like we still have elders living who speak our language fluently. It was their first language, through the work that we're doing, like we're learning directly from them, and by learning and working directly with them, it's also healing a part of them,
Yeah.
because as we know, the legacy of the residential schools and the legacy of the Indian day schools, speaking your language was not the thing to do. So we've watched, over the years, all these beautiful relationships start to form, and all these things happen that we didn't expect. So one of the women that had been working with us at the time, we had been planning to bring her with us. Her name was Trudy Lozon, and she's actually one of my actual blood relatives. She would have been first cousins with my grandmother, so she's essentially my grandmother or my auntie. While we were in the planning process, she ended up getting really sick, really, really sick, and she ended up in the hospital. And when nobody really knew like what was going to happen, and she ended up getting better, but she didn't get well enough to be able to attend the trip with us. So we didn't bring any elders. Actually, that opened up the door for Kahstoserakwathe, actually, for you to join us.
I'm a little bit of
So-
an elder, but not in that way.
in a different way.
Yeah.
An auntie, yeah. So anyways, you know, fast forward, we're in these collections, and we're looking at our baskets, and we see Mary Adams Gahan, her baskets. And Mary Adams is Trudy's mother. And so Trudy, she would tell us stories as like when she was young. She remembers her and her siblings would have to help her mother make black ash baskets in the house, and she would talk about them, like the different things she had to do and how she learned. And she helped her mother up until her mom had passed away, and then she put down basket making. And it wasn't until our group had reached out to her, because we were running a basket making class, and the instructor only spoke English. So we asked her if she would come in and translate on the spot and help us to stay in like an immersive environment, and so we could learn the language to do with basket making and all those different things. And she said yes. She taught us tons of different stuff, different language, different techniques. That's where she was sharing these stories. And she said that was the first time she had made a basket since her mother had passed away, I don't know how many years before.
Wow.
Okay. So now we're
Yeah.
in the collections. Let me bring us back to the collection. And we're with the baskets that her mother had made. One of the young men that were with us, he gets her on the phone. He FaceTimes her or whatever, gets her on the phone, and we start showing her the baskets.
Yeah.
And so right away she's like, "Oh my goodness, yep, those are my mother's baskets." But mind you, the whole conversation is being had in Mohawk.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh.
bringing the language, we have the basket. She's one of our mentors, and we're using our language with her. It just was this super beautiful moment.
So powerful.
We could have never planned, like we couldn't have orchestrated this. We couldn't have anything this,
No.
and here we are, like reuniting in a space that's like, it must have sounded like how it did when they were making them, and how long ago since those baskets have heard our language, you know what I mean? And man, we were just like, the whole time our hearts were just full, and just full of love. Um and Trudy ended up actually passing away not too long ago. So, like when we talk about what's driving our work, it's coming from the heart, right? Like each one of us can talk about this. There's something inside that's the motivation, that's burning, that's pulsating, that keeps us going. And it's stuff like that. I always talk about this with the folks I work with, and people who are learning the language, because there's a lot of it's a lot of based in fear, right? Like our language is dying, people are passing away, this is too hard. Like, it's based in this fear-based or lack-based. And one of my big goals, and really how I function these days, is like, we totally have to change the narrative of our experience. Like, instead of being so afraid and panicked that our elders are passing away and we're going to lose, and we only have X amount of years and this amount of time. Like, the way I'm feeling is like, we are so fortunate. Like, how lucky are we? I always say
Yeah.
this, like, how lucky are we? Like, we got to learn how to speak our language from Trudy Lozon,
Mm.
and she taught us how to talk about baskets and weaving the baskets, which she learned from her mother as a little girl in their home. It's
Yeah.
like, we're in such privileged spaces, and those moments, it's like, I'm so grateful. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
grateful. Like, that's all you can think and that's all you can feel. And so that's a beautiful story,
Yeah.
to go along with what you're talking about, of like, how are you or anybody else supposed to know what those items mean to different people, and what they bring out for different people. But it was such a beautiful, beautiful experience that
Yeah.
we got to
Yeah.
have with her.
I really appreciate you bringing up gratitude and that perspective, because I think in especially at the NMAI, one of the things that I think we grapple with is like, what kind of story do you want to tell to a general audience about Indigenous people or cultures or histories, right? Because yes, there's a colonial history, there's a lot of hardship, tragedy, all kinds of things that have happened to our ancestors, right? But then there's like so much that we are continually grateful for, right? And that's why we pray in our own ways all the time, whether it's through song or, prayer in our language or whatever. Um, and so I think, here a lot of times it's like trying to find that balance about, wanting to be true to what we've endured, but also celebrate where we are and where we're going. It's something you have to kind of work at, because it's easy to get pulled down into the like you said, that fear mode, right?
I've been talking a lot about this lately with my students, that there's so much, honestly, reward for speaking about us in apocalyptic ways. So there
Mhm.
can be these savior moments, and you know, I have said this a couple times, and you make bank if you present that. Oh, the poor Indians,
Mm.
this, disappearing, and, all that. That's always been the story about us, that we're disappearing. And how do you take corrective measures around that narrative? And is that something that you come across maybe on the regular, about the stories that people want to be told about Indigenous people?
We do analytics on our websites and things like that. And one of the things that continually comes to the surface as a story that people will probably want more information about is boarding schools or residential schools.
Yeah.
And that's again one of those things where, yes, you do want to share that history, people to know about that. But then, we still have boarding schools today in the United States, right? And that's a whole different narrative.
Mhm.
So how can you tell a story that really, this tragic one versus the one that this is about self-empowerment now, and tribes running their own boarding schools? So finding that balance again. I mean, that's what it all comes back down to, I think, is finding a balance, because you want to be able to invite people into a conversation rather than setting people up to be defensive from the get-go. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what we strive to do in museums anyway, like all of us. That's what we're striving to do, is invite people in to have a conversation, to have an experience.
Mhm. From that perspective of also, Indigenous matriarchal leadership, how would you say that is unique and powerful? How does that operate differently? How does that change the environment that is around you? How do we even define what that is,
I'm
if we can?
curious
Yeah.
as to how, I'm the first Native woman director at the National Museum of the American Indian. The first was Rick West, who was an attorney, and then Kevin Gover, who was an attorney, both from Oklahoma. And now I'm a, Native woman from the Southwest, from,
Yeah.
Pueblo person. I'm curious. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think when I came in, I did have some experiences where it was clear where people would have preferred a male director, and just in terms of whatever they perceive, perceiving more of authority in a male director than a female director. So, I certainly have had those kinds of challenges over the years. I've had experiences where I've shown some vulnerability. That's probably been perceived in different ways. Just like you said, the person that was doing the filming was like, "Oh my gosh, she's crying," and then other
She's
people who see it
human.
as,
She's
yeah,
human. It changed her
yeah,
though.
yeah, yeah,
It definitely changed her perspective. It did
yeah.
something for her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, it's hard to say. I don't know. I think now, like I said, I'm 4 years into this job. I'm, how old am I? I'm 55. I'm going to be
Good job.
56 this year. So definitely have a lot more acceptance of my emotions and being emotional when I feel it, kind of thing. Especially if those feelings are coming from a place of like good memories, right? Or heartfelt memories.
Right. Yeah. You were honoring your community and your parents and,
And I just
that
felt really,
tradition.
at the IPCC thing, I was just like really, really, um, I could just feel the warmth of people,
Yeah.
that had been there. I had so many people come up to me and say, hello and, hug me and tell me they're happy to see me. And there was just like a lot of good energy. And I just felt really good being there. And, the past 3 years, or I say 2.5 years, my dad's, has had some health issues. And so, um, and, and, and and it was good to be back home and to be able to see them. And so a lot of different emotions connected with home,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I said, you have shifted Bavetta, because
Mhm.
she's been in that DC space her whole adult
Mhm.
life
Mm.
as well, and very much
Mhm.
operating from that, like, don't, you got to protect
Mhm.
yourself, especially as a woman, like really
Yeah.
protecting yourself and protecting your energy.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
that worry that somebody else is going to pick that up and run with it, as proof,
Mhm.
positive. But it seems your tenacity and direction are what you know um walk you through that. And am I guessing it's consistency?
Mhm.
And you seem methodical and you have that tenacity, and it's so easy to have that chaos. And when people are coming at you, we're Mohawk people, so
Mhm.
we throw down.
I
um
know.
So if you could talk about that, and then talk about this passion that you have for these artifacts, and obviously what how they can affect our communities, like such a direct, beautiful moment. How do you convey that to your staff?
One, I think it's just part of my nature, like my personal nature and the way that I was raised. Like I have a dad who was trained as an architectural draftsman, and then became a jeweler, and he's like very exact about his designs. And then I have a mom who's very organized, right? And I come from a Pueblo culture where we don't, we'll throw down if we need to,
Yeah.
but the most part we're very like we're very reserved and we're very measured. And then, as a new director coming in, I came in as a director during the pandemic when things seemed very chaotic. And I knew that what we needed was slow, steady consistency, right? Because everybody was just like everybody's nerves were frazzled. There was, changes and all kinds of stuff going on. And I guess I kind of trained myself early on to be that. Despite, and now, there's always change going on in your environment and a museum, And so, I just continue, just slow, steady, be consistent, and don't overreact. It's kind of my motto these days. And
We don't know what
so
that means.
yeah,
I know.
yeah,
I'm like, I wish I
yeah.
would have heard this sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, with regards to like the collection and this, like I said, this place from its beginning, its mission and its vision has been rooted in establishing and maintaining relationships with Indigenous people. So from the beginning, so people who work here, they usually people who come to NMAI, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to uphold that mission. So, it is important for me as director to emphasize that importance, of those relationships and those connections with the collections for Indigenous communities. But I have to say, for the most part, the people that work at the museum, that's important to them as well. But what I have to do is just continue to support it. And that means through resources, right? So the way that we budget, the way that we prioritize projects and programs, that has to also be rooted in that importance of relationships with communities.
Nice.
I want to share probably my final story. Since I apparently am a storyteller. Our ultimate favorite part of our visit to the museum was when we went to, I don't even know what it was called, but where they had all of the language documents.
Mm.
And
The
I'm going to
archives,
tell
yeah.
the archives, and I'm going to tell this story a little bit brutally because I don't remember the person's name. I don't remember what anything's called. I just remember having the experience. They set it up before we arrived. They pull out all the Mohawk language, documents, and then they brought out some like Onondaga and other of our sister nations, and they brought out those things and they set it out. We're in like a little library, and they set it out on the table, and the staff were clearly just as nerdy about their work as we were nerdy to get our hands on some old writing and stuff. And
Yeah.
I I didn't know what to expect. Like I said, I had no clue what I'm expecting. I'm just here for the experience, and I show up and we sit around the table and they pull out these boxes, and I was pretty mind blown that when we pulled the documents out of the boxes, they were like the legit documents. Like they were the
Mhm.
notebook. It was penciled, writings, looking at the writing and just imagining him sitting there with, whoever the speaker was sharing these stories. And it's in old writing. Like it doesn't match
Mhm.
how we spell things today. And I'm going through it and I'm trying to read everything. I found this beautiful story and I'm just like, you know, challenging myself if I can understand what's being said. And like I don't even know how long we were there, if it was like an hour and a half, I don't remember. But like I was so like into it. I was so time disappeared and I almost like traveled back in time to this
Mhm.
space. And I was just so, and I only got to like page 9 or something of like a 50-page
Mm.
story. And that was just me. We had all the other folks who were with us sitting nearby, sitting at tables, pulling out documents. Everybody was like giddy
Yeah.
and sharing words like, "Oh my god, look at this, and did you see this, and what would that mean?" And it was such a awesome experience for us because that's what we do every day in our work, right? Is
Mm.
like learn from elders, write down words, share things with each other. We just had a super amazing experience, and then they were able to share those with us. Like we were able to request, copies of different things, and which we received pretty quickly, and things like that. But it's like I guess I never had the experience, but I never thought about that our language is somewhere in
Mm.
boxes,
Mhm.
and that I can
Mhm.
have, as a learner and somebody who's in love with our language, in love with our living elders, like I can also, go and resurrect those things from somewhere
Mhm.
where they've been put away in the dark, and just
Yeah.
like I talked about those baskets and the moccasins and the cradle boards. It's like you can just feel it come to life, and
Mhm.
it was such a cool experience for our team. And like just the icing on the cake, I suppose, after after our whole week there. But yeah, I just wanted to share that story because I don't know, it just was awesome. It was an awesome
Yeah.
experience for us.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that. I mean, that's what, like I said, the team here, they're really invested in those types of experiences too, because they learn something, and then they also get to see that these types of connections are really meaningful, and that's why they want to be here, right? They want to be able to support those types of coming together.
Yeah, because I'm always asking that question of like, these institutions don't really want us there, like
Mm,
universities. And so sometimes I ask that question, like, why even be there if we're not
mhm,
really welcome? And then to see that ability when it's done well, we deserve that
mhm.
beauty, and that access and that connection. And it is because of those institutions and because those early contact people and colonizers did write down our language, and so we have access to that. And re-establishing some kind of different relationship with what those possibilities are, I think are that's the lesson I learn again and again.
Mhm.
And watching Ionkwahronkha'onhátie, um where they come from is they went through our language schools, our Delta immersion language schools, come out teachers. And then that moment of like, how do I stay fluent? Like what happens now?
Yeah.
And so then going back to the land and allowing that land and the elders to influence what your specialty is, like they fish and they tan hides. So it's so exciting that it's these living artifacts and these living experiences, and to see them go into those spaces was really joyful and just raised all kinds of different possibilities
Oh,
as
wow. Well, that's great.
Ungwe. Yeah, it was beautiful. Is there something that you feel like you need to remind people again and again? Is there something that like you tell your husband, like, I have that conversation again? Is there something that, you just, I'm sure there's a lot of those things, but what comes to mind when you are leading in this way of a prevailing overculture of narrative that you have to kind of intersect with all the time?
Think there's still a lot of stereotypes out there, right, about Indigenous people. There's still this thinking that Indigenous people aren't really present in today's society.
Yeah.
We're still here. So that's a narrative or a message that Rick West, in the opening of the museum, that was the prevailing message we were trying to convey with the opening of the museum. But it's one that we still have to reiterate, right?
Mhm.
And then also still work towards transforming teaching and learning about Indigenous people, their cultures, their histories, trying to rewrite some of these grand narratives that have existed throughout history. And we're not in it alone. I mean, thankfully, there's a lot more organizations out there that are helping to dispel stereotypes and to really put Indigenous people front and center. So thankful for that. It's not just NMAI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And what about when you go home? What are some of the things you enjoy? Just even things that you enjoy with your family, or what's it like at San Felipe?
So, when I go home, the first thing I want to do is, of course, eat red or green chili, mostly red, because I can kind of get green here in Washington, D.C., but not really red. So I want to eat some red and green chili, and just, take in the landscape. I think that I've gotten really used to out here, and I live in Virginia, which is, in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC. And of course, it's very green here, lots of trees, and but I
Hmm.
still miss the mountains. I still miss, being able to see the landscape. And so, just taking my surroundings. And then, of course, right now, spending time with my parents is really important.
Yeah.
as they're getting older. And I have nieces and nephews that I really haven't had a chance to see grow up. And so trying to spend time with them. And then just as when I can spend time going to watch dances, things like that are happening at the pueblos. Uh, because that's the thing I really missed during the pandemic, was not being able to see any kind of ceremonies or hear the songs. And so now I recognize the preciousness of that, because during the pandemic, that all stopped for a period of time. And it was weird, right? For me, it was very weird. It's just like, oh my God, we're not doing that. We're not going to have a feast day. It was a little frightening, to be honest, but we knew why.
What a beautiful interaction. What a beautiful, I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and it just helps us so much. And what Gunuwaradu to you from us is greetings, love, and respect for all that you're doing. And I know there's a lot more coming down the pike, so we're sending that energy your way.
What's Gunuwaradu Nyawa ji what did the Watala Ganto, like Nyawa, for sharing everything that you've shared, even just like your energy and everything like that. I'm really grateful for having that moment back in the summertime that really helped me to pay attention to my role, I suppose, as a woman in this work. And Nyawa, for sharing everything you shared today. It was awesome. I'm happy to have been in this space with the both of you.
Yeah, Nyawa.